G'day everyone and welcome back to the channel. Before I let this video go any further, I have to express how grateful I am to everyone who showed their support in the previous video. It is awesome to see my small channel growing by leaps and bounds with every video, so thank you once again. As always, if you enjoy my content or find it helpful, please leave a like on the video to let me know and consider subscribing if you enjoy my other videos. Anyway, enough from me, here's the Court of Blades breakdown. As you're probably aware, Court of Oryx is back, but now it's called Court of Blades. There's a lot of information to process when playing this updated activity, and I felt it would be worthwhile to break everything down into a video. The plan is I want this to be a detailed guide so that players can learn exactly what each modifier does, what each boss's mechanic is, exactly what to look for and what you should do when an augment is present, and everything in normal mode is the same in expert, except that expert, things hit harder and there are champions, as well as banes. I'll try to make it as easy as possible to navigate the video and get the information that you're looking for by adding timestamps for everything. I'll cover the activity and gameplay loop, all augments and hazards, boss variants and mechanics specific to some of the bosses. Starting with the activity and gameplay loop. The short version is stand on the circles, go and kill stuff, do objectives to gain/feed your rune, buy upgrades with runes, rinse and repeat until the timer runs out, loot. For the long version, each wave you start by having the whole team stand on the circles in the middle. Similar to how Season of the Witch and its seasonal activity worked if you played during that period. The next round will start on a timer if you're taking too long. Now, there is an overall activity timer, and there is no way to extend this. It is fixed at 10 minutes when you start and will decrease as you participate in waves. The in-between sections where you can buy upgrades and refill ammo don't subtract from the activity timer, it just freezes it wherever you left the previous encounter. While waiting for your team to stand on the plates, you can take a look at the two thrall statues on either side of the platform. These statues are labelled A and B, and they display the augments that will be active throughout the entire next round. Given that each portal contains 2 waves of challenges, Statue A and the augments displayed on that statue will occur during the first challenger wave, and Statue B and the augments displayed on that statue will occur during the second challenger wave. When you enter the portal, you'll be teleported to one of 3 arenas. These areas don't change, the room layout is always the same, it's just random which room you are actually teleported to. As soon as you enter the arena, enemies will start flooding you, and the boss or bosses will spawn in the center. This is where the augments start to take effect. You can choose to complete or completely ignore the augments in most cases. Sometimes you cannot avoid them, and they become a core mechanic of the boss fight, as the boss will be completely immune to damage unless you actively work on the augmentation. The Court of Blades also has a rotation. The armaments change daily, and the enemy type changes between Hive, Taken, and Dread. There are also augments that are unique to the enemy type, active for the day, as well as bosses that are attached to the enemy type of the day. Upon defeating the boss of the first wave, everything that is considered part of that wave despawns. That means the augments and the enemies all despawn, and you will gain what's called rune progress. I'll go over what that is in a minute. Immediately after killing the boss, the next wave will be summoned, and the enemies and the augments will change accordingly. Upon defeating both waves of challenges, you can leave the portal to go back to the hub, or the waiting area. This is where you are able to buy upgrades, which Bungie refers to as armaments. You can also restock on some of your ammo as well. To buy armaments, you need to spend the runes I mentioned a second ago. There are 3 tiers or levels of runes, and you charge this meter to increase the tier in one of 2 ways. First, defeating the boss of a wave to get +2 progress, or 2, completing the augments of the wave for additional rune progress depending on the augmentation, as well as how well you perform at achieving the augmentation. You'll notice when you go to buy an upgrade, there are different tiers. This corresponds to the tier of rune that you have. So long as you have the rune tier, you can buy an upgrade from that tier or below. However, any purchase will reset your rune. What I mean by this is if you have a tier 2 rune and want a tier 1 upgrade, you will not be able to buy a second tier 1 upgrade until you recharge the rune. So shop wisely. If you didn't manage to get a tier 3 rune at the end of your previous wave, you can choose not to buy an upgrade. and instead continue to fill the current rune you have in the hopes of finishing the next wave with a tier 3 rune. The Shaping Slab also has upgrades for you that affect a variety of aspects in Court of Blades, from providing more armament options to giving you extra ammo each round. So as you gain sigil stones, you should be buying these and equipping them when you can. You're also able to purchase and equip these runic enhancement upgrades from a terminal at the start of Court of Blades, so you don't have to break up your farming with a tower run. Now moving on to the augmentations and hazards, since I've referenced these a couple of times but haven't explained them yet. Augmentations are modifiers or effects that change the gameplay of a wave. They are completely random and can combine in almost any combination. Some of the augments are unique to the enemy type of the day. So if it's Hive, you could see Might or Wrath, and if it's Taken, you could see Banish or Descend. The first two waves upon starting Court of Blades will always have one augmentation each. However, after that, it will be 2 augments or hazards per wave. Hazards are slightly different to augmentations. They are purely there to be a threat to the player, instead of changing how the player should actually approach an encounter. There are 2 hazards that I am aware of, Taken Ignition and Gaze of the Deep. Taken Ignitions are the explosive geysers, or the boop attack, that you see everywhere when you fight Taken. They deal arc damage if you want to defend yourself against them. The actual modifier reads Eruptions of Taken Energy burst from surfaces. This hazard is more of a nuisance than a threat though. They're barely noticeable and you will be far more focused on either the augment or the boss to notice them anyway. Unless you have that one moment where you get absoed by a boss booping you into a wall, or you'll try to run into a corner and then there'll be a geyser there blowing up and killing you. Gaze of the Deep is the other hazard, reading Avoid the gaze of that which spreads suffocating terror. If you've played some of the seasonal content already, you will have seen the giant eyeballs. If these eyeballs are visible anywhere on your screen, then you will start to gain stacks of suffocating terror. When you reach 20 stacks, you'll die. To avoid this, just don't look at the eyes. Look down, look up, look away. Just don't have them in your field of vision. It's okay to look at them for a little while, especially if you're DPSing a boss, but you will have to look away eventually to lower your stacks at some point. As for the augments, we have quite a few ways in which Bungie can spice up the fight and change it round to round. First off, we have Adapt, which reads, Counter a challenger's regenerating shield by matching its elemental type. Essentially, match the damage type of the shield around the boss. To gain the bonus rune progress for completing this augment, you need to break the shield around the boss twice. Even if you break it once and then defeat the boss, you will gain no bonus rune progress. The shield will continue to regenerate and change elemental type even after the augment is completed. As far as I can tell, the shield regens after 25 to 30 seconds of the first shield breaking. It doesn't seem tied to the health bar, as I've been able to destroy the boss before its shield comes back up. Multiple bosses also don't seem to make this augment any easier to complete. When you break the shield of one of the bosses, all of their shields will break. But I think there might be a little bit of a bug at the moment. If you break the shield of an enemy that is part of the wave but is not a copy of the boss itself, then that will count as an additional break for the sake of the augment. Bound is one of the augments that you actually have to interact with in order to DPS the bosses. The Bound augment says challengers gain immunity when together. Entering a ceremonial ring will draw one away. So when the bosses are close together or within the visible ring around one of them, they both get an immunity shield. The way to remove it is to stand at the indicated location. Standing here will eventually make one of the bosses move. It may take some time, but one of them will start to rush you eventually. And then both bosses lose their shield, so you can DPS whichever boss you want. If you take too long to defeat one of them, the ring will move, so all you have to do is follow it. Defeating one of them will finish the mechanic, but you'll only be awarded the +2 rune points if it was done within the timer. The Bulwark Augmentation reads, Destroy small blights to reveal a protector whose taken essence can damage the main blight. Essentially all you have to do is break 3 small mini blights around the big one to summon a goblin that drops a ball which you can throw at the big blight. Do this twice, and that's the augmentation complete. There's no penalty for failing it, it's just a bonus objective that you can choose to complete or ignore. The Sharpen Augment is one of the better augments in my opinion. The description is confront immune blade bearers to obtain swords that strip a challenger's protection. The blade bearers are typically in an immune bubble, so a blight or a hive crystal. Destroying those crystals makes them vulnerable, kill them, pick up the sword, damage the boss. The bosses that have this modifier aren't completely immune to damage, they just take reduced damage, unless you strip the shield with the hive sword. So if your team is confident in their DPS, then you could ignore this augment if you wanted to. I noticed a couple of interesting things when this modifier was active. If the wave contains multiple bosses, then you don't have to strip all the shields off each boss to get the +2 rune at the end. You only have to ensure the final boss doesn't have a shield. For example, when it's the multiple shriekers, kill all but one of them and then strip the shield off the last one for some points. When the timer runs out, you can't damage the shield with the sword any further. I don't know if I just had a bugged instance, but this happened to me. So you will be stuck with lowered damage for the duration of the fight unless you tear the shield off before then. The Swarm Augmentation reads, defend against swarming foes. This one is pretty straightforward and another very ignorable augmentation if you don't want to do it. All you have to do to gain rune progress is defeat 45 enemies in the given time. If you defeat the boss before killing enough enemies, you will gain partial rune progress, but if the timer runs out, you will gain no extra rune progress. You have to complete the objective and defeat all 45 enemies to gain the full +2 rune progress. The ritual augmentation says, locate the matching rune symbol to pierce a challenger's immunity. This augment is pretty straightforward, but can be a bit frustrating to play around as you cannot ignore this modifier. You can only damage the boss when you are standing on the hive plate with the symbol that matches the symbol above the boss. Something important to note is that the boss isn't likely to charge you unless their only attack is melee. So any melee builds become obsolete and hard to use against bosses when this augmentation is active. So if you see this augment on the thrall statue at the beginning, you should prepare a ranged option for DPS just to make your life a little bit easier. The Banish augment is more of a timer. It says defeat casters quickly to prevent banishment or fight your way back to reality. What this means is if you fail to kill the wizards before the timer runs out, you will be teleported to a mini arena where you will have to face a handful of taken enemies. They're not very threatening, but it takes time. You have to defeat a few waves of enemies to spawn a mini boss, defeat it, and then a teleport will open to take you back to the actual boss fight. If you don't remove the wizards before the timer ends, and you can't defeat the boss either, then this will be a massive waste of time. So it's probably ideal to remove the threat, since the wizards are fairly weak anyway, and spending a few seconds killing them is better than spending a minute in the alternative area. Burst is an augment pulled from a mechanic in the King's Fall raid. Essentially, you have to kill a unique ogre to drop its bomb, stand in the bomb until you see player name has detonated a bomb, and then sprint to the safe zone and stay there until you see visual effects of a bomb exploding. The audio is slightly out of sync with the visuals, so I would recommend just standing in the safe bubble until the explosion happens. The Descend augment is another one of the deal with it if you want, I guess, augments. It reads, damage falling blights before they descend fully, or suffer the consequences. Ooh, I'm so scared. As far as I can tell, if you fail to destroy the blights before they hit the ground, then it summons the suffocating terror eyeballs, as well as a few mini bosses. So you could deal with the blights for some extra points, or just DPS the boss and ignore it entirely. If you destroy all the blights before the timer runs out, you get the typical +2 rune. Miasma is one of the augments that is likely to cause you a bit of confusion. It reads, avoid standing on taken stains, which cloak challenges in immunity. This one really confused me at first, because if your teammate steps on the taken, then it becomes immune for you as well. So just make sure you avoid standing on the taken stain when you or your teammates are damaging the boss. If you manage to defeat the boss before the time runs out, you'll receive a full +2 for the rune meter, otherwise you receive nothing. The augmentation might reads, confront mighty Wrathborn soldiers. This augment is very easy. 2 big enemies spawn in the arena, kill them both before the time runs out to gain an extra +2 rune. Defeating them after the time runs out awards +1. You can completely ignore this augment if you want to. It doesn't affect how you do DPS, it's just an extra threat in the room that you might want to get rid of. The Wrath augment can be a bit threatening if ignored for too long. It says use the power of Hive Wells to destroy crystals which summon endless thralls. The endless thralls that it mentions will be cursed thralls, so you have to watch out if using a melee build because you could accidentally blow yourself up. To stop the thralls from spawning, all you have to do is kill certain Hive Knights, step into the glowing pool of goo that they drop on death, to gain a buff that lets you damage the Hive crystals. You do not have to stand in the goo to damage the crystals. Once you've touched the pool, you have a small amount of time that allows you to move around and still deal damage to the crystals. Destroying the crystals before the timer runs out will net you the full +2 rune progress, but after the timer runs out, it will be +1. In addition to augments, there are also various bosses, each with their own mechanics. I have no idea if I've covered all of them, but here is a short list of some of the bosses and their mechanics. My hope is that by identifying a boss with unique mechanics, you won't confuse it with an augment. I think the weirdest boss in Court of Blades is the Blight. It's the most unique boss you could fight because it's not an enemy you damage directly. Instead, you have to destroy the 3 Blights that are surrounding the arena. Another of the weirder bosses is the Ascendant Challengers. When you have a health bar that is named Ascendant Challenger, this means you have multiple bosses to defeat. They could be numerous copies of the same enemy, or weaker versions of main bosses that will be named Shade of X. If you do get a Shade, then most of the time the boss mechanic for that boss will apply to the Shade as well. The first boss that I can mention that has a unique mechanic is Hesrak is a big Hive Knight. He can spawn as a main boss on his own or in a group of Ascendant Challengers. His unique mechanic stays the same regardless of which group he's part of, and that mechanic is every 1/3 of his HP, he will split into smaller versions of himself. The smaller copies then have to be focused down, and then when they reach the 1/3 mark, they'll split again. The idea of this boss is strength in numbers, I guess. The Shade of Keit'ehr, I cannot pronounce these names. The Shade of K is very similar to Kag, in that you have to kill the enemies around him in order to drop the immunity shield. He behaves exactly the same, but he's just a subjugator instead of an ogre. And since he is Dread, K has Resonating Grim protecting him. Zuu Sel, the Elusive Shadow. It's a pretty easy one to explain. The boss goes invisible and hides from you. He won't engage first, so you will have to find him and shoot him. I'll be honest, the first time I fought this guy, I actually lost track of him and could not find him. The last boss that I've been able to get a read on is called Tresk the Undying Trooper. He's a Hive Hunter Guardian, and it made me very confused for a while the first time I fought him. His mechanic is that at every 1/3 of his health, he will spawn a copy of himself. These copies behave the same as him, pop supers just like him, and attack the exact same as him. The only difference is that they have very little health. However, since they're a Hive Guardian, they will continue to revive unless you crush the ghost. If you ignore his clones and kill the main Tresk, and then crush his ghost, you will also kill the clones in the process. And that about wraps up this video. If you've made it this far, thanks for watching. I've definitely missed some of the bosses and their mechanics. They're less important to get a list off in my opinion. I think understanding the augments that are consistently active is the more important thing. Anyway, thanks for watching. Have a great day.